Good afternoon, colleagues. Firstly, I would like to welcome you to today's workshop, and I would like to let you know or aware that this workshop is recorded. This is for the purpose of keeping all our records, as well as to allow colleagues who didn't attend a particular workshop or those who have attended but are willing to access the recording at their lecture stage. So this workshop is recorded. So, okay, let me just, sorry for that. My name is Kosie Chuntuli. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's workshop titled Virtual Presentations and Webinar Skills for Supervisors and Postdoctoral Research Fellows. As academic engagement increasingly takes place in online environments, the ability to communicate clearly and confidently in virtual spaces has become an essential skill for every researcher and supervisor and postgraduate student as large. So that is the reason we are having this workshop today, and we are honored to have Dr. Lorenzo David, who will be guiding us and giving us some of his tips as to how do we navigate around that. So before I can move on, I would like to go through some housekeeping rules. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions or raise your hand to engage in discussion. We encourage an interactive and collaborative environment, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts, your experiences. However, I will now shortly enable all your mics. Colleagues, I would like to ask if you are not asking a question or having any input, make sure that your mic is muted at all times. If you do have a question or input, please make sure that there is no background noise coming from your mic that can disrupt us or the proceeding of this workshop. If you do have a question, just raise a hand and then I will notify Dr. Lorenzo that someone has a question, or alternatively, you can type under the chat your question and then I will stop Dr. Lorenzo to attend your question. A feedback form I'll be sharing under the chat. We kindly request you colleagues to take a few moments or few minutes just to fill in the feedback so that we can get an insight as to how this workshop impactful to you or to your research journey. So we also request that feedback to be filled so it can help us in terms of generating the certificate of attendance as it's the platform where we get all your information. And to those that have registered for this workshop, we will get all your information and be happy to generate a correct certificate of attendance. So, speaking of a certificate of attendance, colleagues, I did mention in yesterday's workshop that all the certificates for April and March and Feb have been sent out. So, if you didn't get your certificate of attendance, however, you did attend any of the workshop, or you received your certificate of attendance probably with the incorrect details, because some of the colleagues were using the direct link during that time. So that is why most of the certificates came out without their staff or student and numbers. So I kindly request you, if you have that issue, you can email us and then we'll be happy to rectify that. And now, colleagues, I introduce you to our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David. Dr. Lorenzo David is currently a coordinator at the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School University of Johannesburg. Dr. Lorenzo was recently awarded a PhD in biochemistry for his assessment of transferring tech gold palladium and gold palladium bimetallic nanoparticles and their potential for anti-drug cancer delivery at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. By adopting a holistic approach to education, Dr. Lorenzo hopes to inspire students to achieve personal and academic success with a hands-on and learner-centric approach to a value-based learning. With that being said, colleagues, thank you once again for attending, and thank you to our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David, for taking your time in facilitating today's workshop. We look forward to your presentation, and we do hope and believe that colleagues who have taken their time to attend will learn something today. I now hand over to you, Dr. Lorenzo David. You can proceed with the session. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Nkosi, and welcome to everyone who is attending the session today. We'd like to thank you all for making the time for joining us once again. We really hope that today's session, which builds on a bit from what we spoke about in yesterday's workshop, will assist us when it comes to virtual presentations, as well as some webinar skills for supervisors and PDRFs. But I feel that this presentation is actually applicable to anyone who's doing online presentations. And due to the topic itself, we've tried to cover as many different aspects as possible. So there will be a lot of things that many of you would be aware of, and we just hope to cover everything so people can pick and choose what will be most applicable to them. So if you just give me a minute, I'm going to share my screen. And Mr. Nkosi, if you could just let me know if you can see my slides, I'm going to switch over to presenter mode. And if it is everything's okay?
Yes, everything is fine on my side. Colleagues can confirm if they can see the presentation that is being shared currently.
Okay, perfect. So once again, thank you all for making the time to attend. We really hope that this is going to be an engaging session, as was yesterday, and your feedback is always valued because we understand that we can learn from one another is what we a common theme throughout all of these workshops that we run. So we hope to learn from the audience as well, and obviously this is based on all of our different experiences. So just quickly to go through the agenda for today's presentation, we'd like to touch on what is the key differences when it comes to an in-person presentation versus virtual. Because many of us who've been in, obviously in both situations will understand that there are several differences. And due to these differences, we actually will have to adapt our approach, especially when it comes to audience engagement. And a second example would be an element of good academic presentation, and I've included obviously a webinar into this, as well as we'll move on to discuss what are some of the common presentation or virtual presentation challenges. We have mentioned things like engagement of the audience. There can be technical issues. There could be issues, if you are showing your camera, issues regarding your lighting or your slides and how they present. So these are some of the key topics that we will discuss. Thereafter, we'll move on to some essential presentation skills. And following that will be how do we engage with a virtual audience? Now, I'd just like to point out that this obviously will depend on the audience that you have as well. But these are some key elements that we actually can try and attempt to include in our webinars and our virtual presentations. I think when it comes to a virtual setting, it is a bit more difficult in terms of getting that same level of engagement. When you are presenting, let's just say in front of a lecture, or if you're doing it at a conference or a webinar,
Sorry, Dr. Lorenzo, can you hear me? Colleagues, can you still hear Dr. Lorenzo, or is it my network? Thank you. Dr. Lorenzo, can you hear me?
conference techniques that you, yes, I can.
Yeah, you just went quiet or muted for a while, so we
Oh,
lost you.
I don't know if
Probably.
it's the internet connection. Let me just see. Let me try again.
I
Sorry,
think it's
colleagues.
internet.
Yeah, no, I think actually someone else was trying to call me on Teams. So just give me 1 minute and I will
Okay,
Okay,
sorry for that, colleagues. Dr.
are you able
Dr.
to hear me
David, are you
now?
back? Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes. Okay, okay, thank you. I think there was some issue with Teams. I apologize for that. So I'll run through it quickly again. I won't spend too much of time. And if you're unable to hear me at any point, Nkosi, just let me know. Okay?
Okay, okay,
Okay, thank you. Okay, so once again, we'll quickly run through the agenda because I'm not sure exactly where I cut off. Firstly, we'd like to discuss what are the main differences in terms of an in-person versus a virtual presentation. So we went on to say that in many cases, and for many of us who've been in these situations, we understand that a virtual presentation actually presents its own set of challenges. And due to these differences, we actually will have to adapt our presentation to obviously overcome them. We thereafter will touch on some elements of a good academic presentation. What are some of the key elements that we should actually include, especially in terms of a virtual or a webinar? We thereafter going to move on to some common virtual presentation challenges. We have mentioned issues relating to engagement of your audience. Maybe there's technical difficulties, something we just experienced a few seconds ago in terms of connectivity. So these are all challenges that we are going to have to, put some sort of plan in place on how to deal with them as and when they do arise, because obviously we understand that technology is not always the most reliable, especially when you need it the most. We'll move on thereafter from to some essential presentation skills, obviously how to keep engaged with your audience, and thereafter, we'll go leading on to that point will be how do we effectively engage with a virtual audience? Now, I know in a in-person setting, it's often much easier to gauge how your presentation is being received by obviously the audience because you can physically see through their body language, maybe their facial expressions, maybe the types of questions or the level of engagement that you're actually getting. However, when it comes to a virtual setting, all you are seeing is essentially some faces on a screen. And in this case, I'm not even able to see that. So in that way, I think how do we engage with the virtual audience actually is a key factor of this presentation. And thereafter, we'll go on to quite an important session, which will be the question and answer. And at this point, we'd like to invite any questions that you may have based on this, on this presentation, or even provide some feedback in terms of what has worked for you in the past. And, maybe there's some different techniques that you may have employed that's not in this presentation that all members of the audience can actually benefit from. So let's get started. So as we said, we'll start off with what is the key difference in terms of an in-person versus a virtual presentation. And we've broken it down into a few key points. The first one is going to be our audience feedback. Now, as we've discussed previously, we understand that in an in-person setting, we are able to visibly see our audience, and obviously we're able to read body language, we're able to read facial expressions, and obviously we can get the real-time feedback in terms of even if nothing is spoken. However, when it comes to a virtual setting, we understand that all we often see is faces on a screen, and often there's no video at all, except for the presenter in many cases. The next key difference would be engagement dynamics. Now, obviously, we understand if there's an in-person seminar or a presentation, we understand that that level of engagement is going to be a lot higher because you will be generally, depending on your presentation style, you could be pacing, you could be, walking around, but there will be that eye contact that also happens with the audience. And that is what actually keeps people interested as well in what we're saying. If we notice that in terms of the content that some of the members of the audience are actually losing interest, we can switch it up. We can bring out a question, we can switch to a different slide, we can summarize, we can move faster, we can increase our pace at which we're speaking, or we can emphasize certain points much better. However, when it comes to a virtual setting, you don't have that same level of feedback. And obviously that will affect your ability to engage. So in many times, and when many of us would have sat in on virtual presentations, like I've sat in some virtual presentations where the presenters have been absolutely fantastic. However, the audience was not engaged. Now, if we look at it from the perspective of we are presenting, That may come across as, you know what, the audience is not interested, but that may not always be the case because many people are not comfortable actually unmuting their mics or even typing in the chat box for various reasons. So I think in terms of a virtual event, it may feel actually quite isolating, and it is also easier for attendees to get distracted. Now, when we say isolating, this does not only relate to you as a presenter, but it also relates to the audience, because obviously they are now sitting in their offices or maybe they're sitting at home. And obviously, at this point, distractions become much more. It's easier for them to get distracted. The third point would be the level of interaction. Now, if we think back to when we sat in our undergraduate classes or even honors, masters, PhD, when we sat in those classes and the lecturer was physically in front of us, questions and discussions actually flowed naturally. And that was because of the face-to-face nature of this meeting. Now, obviously, as we've mentioned a few times before, in a virtual format, this is not always possible. And due to it not being possible, interactions will generally rely on your chat, your polls, or your question and answer tools. And this comes in a bit later on, maybe halfway through the presentation, where we will actually request some feedback from you in the form of a poll in terms of what has been some of the major issues that you have faced in terms of their virtual presentations. And you can answer this based on the perspective of an audience member, and you can also answer it from the perspective of a presenter. And it would be, I think, quite interesting for us to discuss. So actually, I think that would be best for us to leave towards the end in the question and answer session. And the last point would be technical reliance. Now, we understand that when you are presenting, let's just, for example, say a lecture, it's your voice, it's your notes, and possibly the slides. If the slides go down, it's okay, you can make a plan and you can still go through the content and deliver your presentation. However, when you are on a virtual setting, you are highly dependent. In fact, you're completely dependent on a stable internet connection. Whether there's good audio, whether there's good video. I mean, I just broke off now for a few minutes, and you could have seen the effect. No one knew anything that was going on. All they could see was the slides. And this will also tie into the platform proficiency. So if we're using Zoom or using Teams, while these are reliable platforms, they will have glitches at certain times. And Murphy's Law, it always happens when you don't want it to happen or when you need it to work the most. So we understand, from the short summary that virtual presentations actually introduce new challenges. Essentially, we are talking to a head on a screen and there is no immediate feedback. So how you gauge to move forward with your presentation, these are things that you're going to have, that we will learn as we continue to move through, obviously, a virtual presentation and building up our skill set in that. I think trying and leaving opportunities for the audience to engage. In all of our workshops that we do, we always say that at any point, if you have a question, please don't wait until the end. Pop it into the chat box immediately because we can attend to it immediately. And if there's something that's on your mind, you can also unmute your mic and feel free to join in the conversation because we would like, the whole role of this is to assist where we can. So this can be quite a controversial question, but the next slide deals with what makes a good academic presentation. And before I move on to it, we would like to put a not so much a disclaimer, but a statement that, this is often based on personal preference, shall we say. If you look at within certain faculties, what makes a good academic presentation may vary from another. But there are some key similarities that we have actually identified, and these are what we'd like to discuss a bit further on. So I think the first one would be when it comes to a slide, it is important for your slide to deal with a single key message. Now, this has the added advantage because it allows the readers to, or the listeners, excuse me, to actually track what you are talking about at that particular time. We must also keep in mind that when we are giving these a presentation in general, The attendees are not only listening to what we're saying, they're listening to what we're saying and they're reading what's on our slides as well. So that's why it's important for us to be able to structure our presentation in such a way that each slide guides the reader, guides the listeners through what we're trying, the message we're trying to tell or the story that we're trying to tell. So therefore, I think it's important for us to have a single key message on a slide. Now, obviously, if we're presenting results, it would be a benefit for us to present, let's just say we are testing cytotoxicity of a particular compound. It would be good for us to put all of our cytotoxicity studies on relating to a particular cell line on one slide, so the readers are or the listeners are able to follow what we're saying. But obviously, this will vary depending on your content as well. But as much as possible, let's try and keep it one key message per slide. We hear this a lot where less is more. So it's important for us to aim for our audience to actually remember one core point that we're trying to actually deliver when it comes to this presentation. And this is especially true when we're speaking about our research. When we're going through our research, there are so many different aspects which are important and so many different aspects that we want to actually include in our talks. But I think it's as much as we have the passion to actually present, we must also look at it from the perspective of the audience who has to retain this information. We don't want to go through checkbox exercises where we just presenting and whether or not it's absorbed, that is of not as important. We obviously want to find a balance between what we're presenting and what we absorb and kind of find the maximum between them. The next one is going to be the use of visual aids. And I must admit, in this presentation, I have not used too many visual aids. We try to make it colorful. We try to make it obviously engaging with some animations. But when it comes to visual aids, if you have, for example, a mechanism, a process, or a protocol, or maybe even your methodology that you want to depict, instead of laying it out, for example, as we've done here, where it's quite a text-heavy slide, what would be interesting for us to do would be maybe to put it in the form of a chart, put it in the form of a flow chart. So these visual aids actually aid to your message. It allows the readers to follow exactly what's going on, and they are able to link what you are saying with what's on the slide. And in that way, it actually improves the retention of the information that you are obviously trying to present. The one idea per slide helps to avoid cognitive overload. So many of us would have been in situations previously and previous presentations, will say when we were in undergrad, where the lecturer just needed to get through the content and their slides were very, very text heavy. What happened? Well, for me personally, sometimes halfway through the slide, I would be completely lost as to how we got from point A to point B. So I think it's important for us to also break down our information into bite-sized chunks to allow readability as well as digestion of the information. And then we're going to say bullet-heavy slides tend to lose their attention. Instead, incorporate meaningful visuals as memory aids. So when we came to actually developing this presentation specifically, we decided not to actually incorporate too many visuals. And the reason being is many people will use these slides later on and they'll just download the slides. So we need to include as much content as possible. So I think the context in which you're presenting as well will play a part in terms of how you're going to design your academic presentation. I think it's also important for us to obviously have a strong structure, as with anything, in terms of our academic writing. So it's important for us to use a logical outline, which will be introducing your topic, the body, and the conclusion. And in the conclusion, obviously, we know to always tie up any loose ends that have been, or any questions that have been raised throughout the presentation. And it's important for us to tailor our examples to our audience's knowledge level. And we use the example of this quite often. If you are presenting on your particular research, and imagine that you're presenting it to primary school, high school, undergraduates, postgraduates, and some of your peers. The message and the content essentially needs to remain the same, but the method at which you are delivering it needs to obviously adapt to allow for better retention. So obviously, if we are speaking to primary school students, we will use the simplest form possible. We won't use any technical language. However, if we are speaking to postgraduates or if we're speaking to some of our peers, like our professors, our supervisors, then obviously what we would do is we would make it much more technical because their level of understanding is much higher, especially when it comes to the topic as well. So I think it's always important if you're using in terms of your content, in terms of the examples that you're using, to adjust it according to your audience. And I think this comes into tailoring our presentations based on the audience that we are presenting to. And the last example would be the use of visual aids. So in this case here, visual aid will obviously be a diagram, a chart, an image, maybe that summarizes your key points. And this has many, many different benefits. We understand that instead of reading, let's just say a paragraph which can be copied and pasted onto a slide, it would be much easier for people to digest information in the form of a visual aid. And then we go on to the next section, which involves what exactly makes a good webinar. And I think these are some standard things that we have identified over the course of running some of these workshops. The first one is going to be the quality of the audio and the video. Nothing is worse than signing up for a session which you know is going to be important, you know, if it's relating directly to your research, and every few seconds the presenter is cutting out. So at the same time, we need to ensure that there's clear sound, our microphone is working. If you are using your camera, the lighting is critical. And it's easier for viewers to forgive low video quality when compared to poor audio, because obviously with poor audio, they can't hear what you're saying. So essentially what this boils down to is we need to test the systems that we're using. If we are using a new platform or if we are presenting from a new venue, test the Wi-Fi speed, test the connection, test, you know, obviously do dry runs, especially if it's for a very important presentation that you need to do. It would be important for us to have all of these checks and balances in place. I favor a clean background. So this would be obviously specific to the individual, but I think it's important for us to use a clean and tidy, distraction-free backdrop. So I like using plain white. Reason being is that the images or even the text that we have stands out a lot better. And we want to create a contrast between what is behind, obviously, on the background versus our content, which should be the main focus of any presentation that we're doing. Then we go slide design in terms of virtual. We must understand that there should be high contrast, like what we tried to do here, black versus white. There's a high contrast, it's easy for you to read the text. A large font slide, so obviously with one idea per slide. It's important for us to avoid small text or clutter that may be unreadable on the screen. And the last one would be supplementary materials. Now, when we in an online session, we notice that the trend is moving towards the presenter makes their slides available directly after the presentation or within a few days after the presentation. And I think that's important because if you are in a virtual presentation and you know, we can think back to examples of when we've sat in them. And we feel that we need to write down, obviously, everything that the presenter is saying if we don't have access to the recording. What would happen is that sometimes your message gets lost in translation. So making our slides downloadable or providing handouts will actually reinforce learning and improve engagement as well between yourself and your audience. And obviously, it is also important for us to be clear in our level of communication. So this comes across exactly in the way that we are presenting. So as with any presentation, it's important for us to speak clearly, for us to speak, you know, at a pace that actually matches the audience's level to follow what we're saying. And I think these are some key areas that we can actually monitor to ensure that when we are running a webinar or a virtual presentation, that it is actually of a very high standard as well, or as good a standard as we can, as we are able to produce, shall we say. So at this stage, I've been talking for quite a few minutes, so I'd like to invite, if there's any questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat, or alternatively, just feel free to unmute your mic, you know, and feel free to speak, please. We'd like to improve engagement in any way that we can. So while we're waiting, if anyone has any questions, I'll, you know, take our time and go through this in terms of what are some of the common challenges in virtual presentations? And I think there's four key challenges that we've identified, and this is obviously through some of the experience that we have from running these workshops as well. The first one is going to be many of us would have had some sort of interaction with would be technical glitches. Now, very often this would involve internet dropouts, maybe in terms of your audio feedback or software issues, which can derail a talk. I think it's important for us to understand and maintain composure, especially when we're doing a virtual presentation. It's the same rule that if you're presenting in person, the same rules will apply to a virtual setting. How how we react to these challenges actually affects our confidence, firstly, and also affects the way that we're presenting. So we understand that, sometimes there are things that are out of our control. For example, if the internet drops out, there's generally not much that you could have done as a presenter to actually prevent that from happening. So what can you do? You keep your cool and you try your best to actually restore connectivity. If we look at an example in this setting here, Mr. Nkosi is here to assist and moderate the session. So if there's any technical issues and I'm not aware that my audio has cut out or maybe my internet has dropped, Mr. Nkosi can actually step in and provide the technical assistance and say, you know what, we will actually contact the presenter and we'll be back as soon as possible. So if possible, if you are able to have maybe a colleague of yours who also sits in on the session, especially if it's an important presentation, just as that backup, especially if they're sitting in a different venue, then that can give you a bit of peace of mind that, if your call does drop out, that you are still able to communicate with the, I think there's someone's, okay, okay. Someone able to assist, obviously. The next one, which we've actually spoken quite a bit about, this is going to be the level of engagement as well as the attention of the attendees. Now, without you being able to physically see, once again, we'll drive this point home, without you being able to see the audience, it's hard for you to understand, is my presentation being received well? Is the audience actually engaging with the material? So how do we go about, how do we overcome this? I think it all leads back to your preparation, you know, reading and rereading. What is the title? So let's just say you've been asked to speak on a particular topic. Let's just say you've been asked to speak on virtual presentations. So how do you go about formulating? It goes all the way back to it. Because you are unable to see and judge the actual reaction of the audience, you need to have confidence in what you presenting, that the material is correct, that it is relevant, and that obviously it will be applicable to your particular audience. So I think in terms of the lack of visual cues, what you can do is actually ensure that your presentation aligns very well with the topic. And we can do this through many different ways. I mean, through the levels of research, we can look for similar presentations online. We can look for recordings. We can watch, some videos on YouTube. And these are all different sources of information. And while each of these resources may not present us with obviously the entire presentation, it will give us tidbits that we can actually include to strengthen our overall presentation. I think it's easy in a virtual setting for audience to become passive. They sometimes they will even just be listening to you while doing other work. So I think in a way to keeping them involved, this becomes a bit more difficult. And I think this leads into your content once more. The main way to keep people engaged in a particular presentation would be, is the content relevant to them? So if I am signing up to a presentation on climate change and I notice that halfway through the presentation, the presenter is speaking on the politics of climate change, not actual climate change, it doesn't directly relate to me, and therefore my attention span is going to drop off. But if I signed up for a particular webinar, then I know that obviously that topic is important. And if the presenter aligns with that topic, then obviously my level of attention is going to be much higher there. We need to understand that in a virtual setting, we're actually competing with distractions on the screen. So if you are in person, the audience is unfortunately forced to look at your face and look at you present. But obviously, if you're presenting virtually, they have access to the emails, they have access to, Teams, maybe messages coming in, whatever it may be. So obviously, you're competing with these distractions as well. And that leads on to the next point would be distractions and multitasking. Now, we notice that attendees will obviously get distracted much more easily in a virtual setting. You know, there's so much else. If they're at home, they could be family or the kids that's actually interacting or disrupting them. And if they're at work, it could be a colleague that comes through or even your email. So these are some of the challenges that you will have to kind of navigate. And while you can't, obviously, we can't change the behavior of our attendees, we can structure our presentation to hopefully be as engaging as possible. I think virtual settings also make it much easier for us to tune out in terms of, let's just say we have a presentation running and we have an important email to send. So we logged in, but we may not actually be retaining the information as well. And obviously, like we said, distractions are much more frequent. So plan to recapture the attention. And how do we go about doing this? So yes, in terms of our actual presentation, maybe having links to videos, maybe having more visuals, these can all be ways to recapture attention. But one of the most powerful ways, if we remove obviously the importance of your content, will be how exactly are you presenting? So this will be, are you being engaging with your voice? You know, are you emphasizing certain points? And I think having this level of interaction, passion, and energy will actually allow your audience to actually be much more engaged in the session. And obviously, the last challenge that we have will be an impersonal feel. So when you are speaking face to face, there is that level of connection which is absent from your virtual setting. Audience members can feel like just another face in the grid, and I felt like this in many cases. And I think this is quite a difficult one for us to actually, as a presenter, to resolve. I think the way in which we open up to questions, the way in which we engage to the audience will actually have quite a big play in how an individual feels, whether they feel comfortable enough to actually contribute to a question in this particular session. And the last point here would be to encourage empathy. So if something goes wrong, the audience generally understands it's not the presenter's fault. So if your interconnection jumps off, that, like we said, that is not going to be listed as being your fault. Obviously, you're not responsible for the internet. So I think it is important when these challenges arise, if there's a technical glitch, if there's lack of internet connectivity, for you to remain calm, because once you connected again, remember that you have to pick up where you left off. If you were very passionate, energetic before the glitch happened, when you come back on, you can't be stressed about, oh, you know what is the audience going to think? I mean, people understand at the end of the day, things happen. So we need to maintain that level of professionalism as well as calmness when it comes to a virtual presentation. So quite simply, like we said, we're going to cover even the basics when it comes to these sorts of presentations. So we'll start off with your technical setup and obviously the equipment that you're going to use. So ensure that your microphone is working. This can be a simple thing, but obviously we've had issues before where we go on to present and for some reason the mic refuses to work on the laptop itself. So in that case, maybe have a set of headphones close by or even have your earphones close by so that you can obviously connect via Bluetooth or via plugin and you're able to deliver your presentation. I think the importance of sound quality is cannot be understated enough. People need to hear what you're saying. They don't only need to hear what you're saying, they need to hear when you're emphasizing certain points, they need to hear your passion, your energy for a particular topic. And obviously, this will improve their level of attention as well. If you are obviously presenting with your camera on, the level of lighting is going to be important. So obviously, always sit with the light facing you, which basically allows people to see your face as well as that will improve the level of engagement as well. Now, if you have some, you look at example, some content creators where I think there's quite a bit that we can learn from them in terms of virtual presentations. They use, for example, a ring light to ensure that your face is bright and visible as well. I think it's important for us to keep the background uncluttered. So if you're sitting in your office and you are actually presenting, just make sure there's nothing important on the pinup board behind you that you don't mind people seeing. And I think it's also important for you to test virtual backgrounds to ensure that they look professional. I mean, at the end of the day, if we are doing a presentation for a department, we must remember that we are representing our department and by the extension UJ as well. So Always try to keep things as professional as possible. It's important for you to obviously, once again, if you are using a video, the position of the camera. So it's always good for you to be looking directly into the camera and it being at the same level. This just offers a level of professionalism as well as allows the audience to feel more connected to you. So even though you are looking at the camera, remember the audience, it feels as if you are looking directly at them. So that improves the engagement as well. And the last point, as always, we'll always do a technology check. So always do a trial run of the audio, the video, even the slides in the actual setting. See how it projects on a screen. See how you sound, and before going live or recording, run through a mock session to catch some of the issues. And then this leads into the value of having a backup, which is an extra mic, or even having a little device there which allows you to connect to a portable Wi-Fi. I think these are some things that we can actually put in place. And as we go through more and more virtual presentations, we'll see that this actually becomes second nature to us. So we've already spoken about this. In terms of our slide and visual design tips, we're not going to touch on it again, but basically to drive home the point, there should be one idea per slide or one topic that we discuss per slide. The font should always be readable, and this is obviously going to depend on, you can play around with it, what presents best, how much of font do I, how much of text do I actually have, what are the size of the images that I need, what are the size of the graphs, and obviously this is going to be left up to your judgment as well. I think it's important for us to also use graphics wisely. Um, don't just put an image there for the sake of putting it. Obviously, we all know this. Include relevant images, charts or diagrams that illustrate a key point. It's always important for us to simplify complex figures for clarity. So if you have a very technical, if I think about a mechanism that, still gives me nightmares up to today. Um, So if we have a very complex example, a complex process that we want to speak about, I think it would be better for us to actually present a simpler image and add in the complex, basically any complex aspects through us talking, because we're able to provide context, we're able to obviously explain much better than we would in GIF text as well. So maybe there's a dual functionality or a dual approach that we can have to kind of discussing complex ideas or processes. I think it's also important for us to have a consistent style. And this is something that we'll notice when maybe when we've had to present in our undergrad. We'd be so focused on the content that obviously other things like how the slides look, am I using the same font throughout, the same color scheme, all of this here. And this just adds a level of professionalism to your slide deck as well. So maintain a clear template, limit your animations to that which is necessary. So in this case here, I have 4 points on the slide and I wanted to discuss them in isolation. Therefore, I animated each of them separately. So basically all of the attention is on that one particular point that comes up when I'm ready to talk about it. And I think consistency helps keep focus on the content. I mean, if we're presenting, we don't want people to be talking amongst themselves. And we'll see this very often in lectures where the students, if you make an error on a presentation, all the focus will go on that. So by maintaining a level of consistency throughout our slides, obviously it keeps the content on what we're saying on the actual slides themselves and not on any distractions as well. So in terms of our delivery and our presentation skills, we've actually had a session yesterday in terms of effective public speaking in academia. So we've just pulled out some of the key points from there, just in terms of in a virtual setting. So what do we see here? It is important for us to have energy and to also for us to have expression. So it's important for us to speak with enthusiasm. So if we are not enthusiastic about a particular topic, how can we expect the audience to be excited about it? In terms of your voice, variation in the tone, what you are emphasizing versus maybe what is important. How we change through those levels is actually important. And I think it's also when you're using a video, smile, something which is does not come naturally to all of us. But I think it's good to actually, because we don't have that same level of connection that we do in a physical setting, these simple, cues in terms of our body language, in terms of our voice, actually makes you more approachable, makes it more welcoming, and allows people to feel much more comfortable, which is what we want to do in a virtual presentation. The comfort of obviously the audience, whether they feel that they can actually ask you a question, whether they can connect with you. We need to go the extra mile because obviously that level of contact and yeah, the human contact is not exactly there. So once again, when you're using your camera, it's important for you to look directly into the camera. And obviously this, in terms of the audience, it will feel as if you are looking at them. And by doing that there, it also improves engagement. They can see that you're interested, that you obviously want to connect to them as well. I think as we go through our presentation, it's important for us to vary the pace at which we speak, to vary the pace of our actual presentation as well. And I think I always put it in terms of a conversation. So if I'm having a conversation with, let's just say, a lab, a colleague of mine, someone from my lab, and if I'm having this conversation with them, if I speak in a monotone and if I speak nonstop and tell them every single problem I'm having with my protocol, not much is going to be retained because by the time I get to the end of my 20-minute monologue, they would have forgotten what I've said in minute 5. So I think it's important for us to also pause at certain points, allow the audience time to actually digest what you are saying, you know. Now when it comes to your virtual setting, your audio can also compress your speech, so that can make your clarity affect the clarity of what you're saying as well. And with I mean, all of us would be doing this before, maybe even obviously in the beginning, would be to practice, rehearse the full presentation out loud, especially if it's something that you've identified the areas that you want to improve on. So rehearse it. There's nothing wrong with it, even to an imaginary audience. And what this does, it allows you to become more comfortable with speaking out aloud. Now, many of us, in terms of a conversation, will have no issues presenting or even just discussing with our colleagues or even discussing in, let's just say, a lab update meeting. But when it comes to presenting, there are several different factors. I mean, number one, you're sitting in front of a computer, so there's no person in front of you. The next thing, you can't see your audience, you know. So I think in terms of also being able to have variation in your voice, I think these are all things that we would have to address as we go through. Kosi, is there a question or was someone just unmuted? I think it
Sorry,
was.
Doc, for that. Some of the colleagues were just unmuted.
Okay, no problem. So we're going to go on to quickly, how do we go about engaging the virtual audience? So it's always important for you to start with a hook. As they tell you when you're writing an abstract or when you're writing, the first couple of lines of your chapter, capture the attention of the audience. And the same thing is what we need to do in a presentation. So we need to start off, we can either start off with an interesting fact or an important point, or what is the importance of this particular presentation, or even the tone in which we're speaking. We need to be we need to present something a bit different to grab the readers or the listeners' attention. I keep saying readers' attention, but grab the listeners' attention and get them interested. So start off with a hook, you'll notice in some presentations, some virtual and in person, presenters like to start off with a joke or maybe like a bit of a comic. And that also breaks the ice and allows everybody to relax a bit more. So just something for us to consider. The next one would be for us to use interactive tools. So the audience should not feel as if their only purpose there is to sit and listen to you go on and on. There should be the option for interactivity. I mean, this can be achieved through your polls, through your question and answers, through your chat, and depending on your topic as well and what workshop you actually are running, a breakout room, which can be of great benefit because even if they're not talking directly to you, you're stimulating conversation within the audience itself. You're trying to improve the retention of what you're trying to say, generate discussion. And when they come back, you'll notice that people generally are a bit more willing to actually speak as well. I think it's important for us to maintain variety as well, and I think we've mentioned this quite a few times in terms of changing your delivery every few minutes. I don't want to sound overly excited from minute 1 to minute 30. There will be, you have to vary that as well. And I think trying to be as natural as possible. I think this is something that when we are presenting, we obviously want to put our best foot forward and we want to present as well as we can. But I think, in my personal opinion, some of the best presenters that I've seen, it seemed very natural. It seemed like a conversation. So while they're using formal language, while they may be using technical language, it feels as if they're talking directly to me. And I think that is something that we can actually work on. If we can tailor our approach to be more of a sound more of a conversation. I'm presenting this to a good friend of mine. That does seem to improve the absorption of what is being presented as well. And I think that it's important for us to also build relationships. Now, what does this include? Building relationships, or yeah, building relationships could be using specific examples that the audience will relate to. Let's just say if we are presenting on funding, funding for postgraduate students, what are some of the examples that many people can relate to? Number one, the difficulty in filling out a grant application, or maybe how competitive the market is in terms of funding. So if we're using these examples and we build them into the talks that we're actually having, people will actually connect to them and they will engage much more with your material. And I think calling on your participants, this is more applicable when we're in a lecture setting, or maybe if we're doing something, some people may have been lucky enough to do like a keynote address or be an invited speaker. And in that case, there they can obviously engage a bit more with the participants as well. So, what are some of the interactive tools? And these tools generally we'll speak about in terms of Teams. So, Teams has the very good ability to actually pull up polls and quizzes. Now, this is quite good because sometimes people may not want to engage in the chat, or they may not want to obviously unmute themselves because they may not just feel comfortable. Everyone is different. But generally, if you have a poll or a quiz, this you can answer in isolation, meaning it will pop up on your screen. No one else is going to see that you wrote that, and people they feel a bit more free in order to say what's on their mind as well. So the use of a poll or a quiz actually also allows you to get the instant feedback or their opinions. So if you're presenting on a particular topic, but you just want to find out, what is your experience with, let's just say, funding applications, and you get instant feedback, and from the feedback that you get, it actually can direct conversation or the direction in which your presentation goes. And by doing so, you are presenting obviously something which is much more relatable. You're using examples that they can understand much easier, and this will actually improve your engagement as well. So I think in terms of your question and answer sessions as well, it's important for us to schedule pauses for questions, and that's why we keep asking, is there any questions, or maybe we pop them in the chat box. And I think it's always important for us to read out the question before we answer it, because in that way, we want to keep everybody connected. Everybody knows what's going on. We don't ever want at any point in a virtual presentation for someone to feel lost or not know how we got from point A to point B. Obviously, chat participation. So it's important for us to invite the audience to comment or to answer a quick question in the chat. And I think that this also obviously will improve and make people feel a bit more comfortable for those who are willing to chat. And then we've mentioned the breakout rooms as well, in terms of having a small breakout rooms to generate discussion, and in doing so, um, allows people to think much more deeply on your particular topic or your presentation. So I'm coming towards the end of the presentation. So there's only a few more slides left. So I think the first one is the next slide we're going to talk about is going to be content and variety. So this relates more to your presentation in general. I think it's important for us to relate the content to our audience. So if we are presenting to a high school versus postgraduate students, we will use different examples. We're going to use different examples and different analogies which they are familiar with, which they can just connect the dots and obviously understand what you are trying to say. I think that it's always important for us to define specialized or let's just say area specific, subject specific terms so that everyone on the presentation actually can follow what is going on. In terms of maintaining your variety, it's important once again for you to change up your delivery every few minutes. Mix your slide sharing with just talking, or you can even include a demo or a video, depending on what exactly you are trying to explain as well. And then obviously, as always, and we've mentioned this a few times, it's important for you to encourage engagement with the material. So always ask, are there any questions? Always be willing to answer these questions. And obviously that can be achieved through your polls and your quizzes as well. A good one is, which we've identified, is to ask a rhetorical question. So what you're doing there is you may not get the feedback, but what you are actually doing is you are allowing them to think much more deep on the topic. And later on, generally, that will lead to questions as well. And then we go here to emphasize breaking monotony. So in this case here, it would be changing it up, adding a video where applicable, or maybe having a discussion that's coming up instead of just running through your slides all the time, as we're doing here, unfortunately. Okay, and I think it's important for us to also keep an eye on our pacing. Remember that there is a reason as to why lectures generally are, 45 to 55 minutes long. And that's because the human brain can obviously only retain a certain amount of information. So I think it's good to give, if your presentation is going to go on for a couple of hours, it's good to give a break, maybe put up a discussion point, break people into breakaway rooms, and that is just going to improve your overall retention and obviously discussion of your topic. Okay, so I think these are the last two slides that we're going to discuss. So the first one is going to be what are some best practices, and we're going to wrap up the session as well. So in terms of your do's and don'ts, what is important for us to do is to always test the technology ahead of time. Try to keep the presentation as interactive. So this can involve asking questions, using the chat, but also be aware that there is only so much you can do from your side. You can cover all of these key aspects. You can think of new ideas to keep the presentation interactive, but don't be disheartened if you don't get much response. It does not mean that people are necessarily not interacting well with your content. I think it's important for you to always speak clearly and completely avoid from just reading from your slides. So if you have a key point, read out the key point and bring some of your insights into it. And the last point would be to keep your slides, minimal, or they say less is better. So keep your slides uncluttered, and focus on the one key point per slide technique. Some things to stay away from will be, only text-heavy slides where we have paragraphs on them, where we talk too fast. I'm guilty of this sometimes, where it's hard to follow online, and to rely only on a script. So as we've said yesterday, there are different people present in different ways. Some people feel much more comfortable having a script where they can logically progress from point to point, and other people just like to be, these are my key points, and I will find my way throughout the presentation based on how the discussion is actually going. I think it's important for you to engage as naturally as possible for the presentation to feel more like, a conversation. And I think don't panic over glitches. I mean, sometimes there are things which are actually, there's many things that are not in our control. And, the audience will understand as well. But I think us maintaining our level of calm actually plays a big part in how the rest of the presentation goes. Because once you become online, once you get connectivity to the internet once again, you are expected to obviously present well again. So just maintaining that. And then we go on to some of the key takeaways. The first one is going to be be engaging from the start. It's important for you to use an interactive opener or even go through your agenda. The next point would be for you to focus on clarity. So there should be clarity in terms of your slides. There should be clarity in terms of the way that you are discussing particular points. And they obviously should be clarity in terms of your audio as well. So focus on the clarity, understand that there needs to be a logical flow throughout your presentation. Look at it from the perspective of the audience and look for gaps or areas that you can improve as well. I think that level of interaction is, we always would like to embrace an interaction. We always wish there was more interaction because it allows the presentation to benefit more people. So I think it's important for us to actually focus on that. Be prepared. So when it comes to being prepared, this can touch on so many different topics. But basically, have backups of your slides. Have backups for example, in terms of a headset or your earphones. In terms of lighting, in terms of interconnectivity. Just try and have as many fail safes as possible. And I think our ability to adapt is actually very important. So there will always be challenges which arise in terms of virtual presentation. So our ability to adapt, as well as you actually practicing beforehand, if there's a particular area that you feel needs strengthening, that will only aid to your ability to give an effective virtual presentation as well. So I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. I'd like to thank you all for once again taking the time to sign up and listening to this presentation. We really appreciate it. And if there's any questions or any points of discussions or anything really that you'd like to add to the presentation, please feel free to jump in. We'd really like to hear your view. But other than that, I'll hand over back to Mr. Nkosi. So thank you, Nkosi.
Thank you, Dr. David, for that very good presentation. Colleagues, if you do have a question, just unmute your mic. I have enabled all your mics. You can just unmute your mic or raise a hand, or alternatively, just type under the chat and or under Q&A if you do have any contribution to make or any question that you might have. So let me just check under the chat. I saw a message from, I think, Dr. Nompumelelo. I think by that time we were talking about common challenges in virtual presentation, the technical glitches. So Dr. Nompumelelo was just confirming that. She was like, I'm having problems being part of this meeting right now because of internet. So that was the point that she made during that time. So colleagues, I don't know if anyone has a question. It seems like we don't have any questions for now, Dr. Lorenzo. Okay, I see another question from Dr. Nompumelelo. What are the alternative options for people who aren't compatible with PowerPoint? I'm a technophobe.
Okay, that's a good question. I think there's Google Slides that you can use as well, but obviously that's just a variation of PowerPoint. Something I found to be quite useful is I think it's Slide Speak, and this leads into AI as well. So if we don't have a lot of time. Let me structure it this way. If we don't have a lot of time to actually put this presentation together, but your content is done, you just need to make it more visual, more engaging. There are certain AI tools that you can use which allow you to develop, obviously, a slide deck. And I noticed with SlideSpeak, you actually can present directly from the online platform. So in what you would do in terms of that, you would take all of your content, which has been separated, obviously, per slide, put it into the AI tool. It will generate the slides for you. You're able to adapt to edit in terms of, is there certain branding, certain colors, certain logos that you need to add, and you can just present directly from there. So in an alternative to PowerPoint, I would say Google Slides, or I would say look for an AI tool, and one that I've used would be Slide Speak as well. That it works very well. So yeah, there is a paid version for it though. Just a disclaimer there. So if you have the free version, you're just not able to download your slides. You can copy all of the content on it, but you obviously can't download it. But I don't think the cost is too much. But you are able to still present from that online platform from your profile as well. Inkosi, I think that actually reminds me, I almost forgot. Would you be able to please post that poll for members of the audience, if possible, while we answer some of the questions? Would that be okay?
Uh, yes, no problem.
Okay.
There is a question from Dr. Adeyemi. What is
Mhm.
the best approach to ask audience questions during a visual presentation?
Hmm. Okay. Thank you, Doctor. I think I'm gonna answer this from my own experience, obviously, right? So I think whenever you direct a question, particularly at someone in a virtual presentation, this is obviously going to be based on your actual audience. But for me, it's never worked well in terms of just asking a question and or what do you think about A, B, and C? So I think the best way to ask questions during a virtual presentation will be what we're doing right now. And you actually brought up, it actually led quite nicely into this. So I think in terms of a having a poll or a quiz, that, in my opinion, would actually generally be the best way for you to ask the question because many people may not be comfortable to actually ask the question, by unmuting their mic, but they would be able to obviously type in the chat box. So I hope we are not proved to be wrong with our actual poll that's been taken now. So the question is, what is your biggest challenge or frustration with virtual presentation? And I think that we can have a few. Um, so I'll just leave it up to the audience for a few minutes to hopefully engage. So for me, it would be, let's just say, lack of personal feel, lack of connection with the audience, and obviously technical issues. So I think it would be interesting to kind of hear some of the feedback from members of the audience. So in the meantime, if you have any other questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat. We'll be more than happy to assist where we can as well.
Yeah, I'm just checking if we do have any other questions. The moment. Okay, I see that there are no questions. Let me check on the Q&A. Okay, we don't have anything at the moment, Doc.
Hi, Mr. Nkosi. I think there is one more of a question here. It says, please, is it possible to get the slide? As in this slide deck that was presented? No problem. They actually are all being uploaded onto the Moodle communities. I think we will be able to upload everything, let's just say by early next week. Give us like 2 to 3 days and everything will be up, even for previous presentations and workshops as well. So hopefully it will be of some benefit as well. So I see we have only 8 responses, so we can just go through some of the results, if that's possible. So if we look at the poll that was asked, this is what is your biggest challenge or frustration with virtual presentation? And we've got some varying answers here. The first one will be audience and audience engagement. Basically the lack of connection or you unable to see the audience's face. So obviously you can't adjust your presentation to obviously improve engagement, the time lack of connection, technical aspect, the personal feel. And I think one that's actually quite interesting is preparation of slides. Um, in terms of preparation of slides, there's several different tools that actually work very well when it comes to putting your content, excuse me, which is in the form of text. So if you write out all of the material for your slides on a Word document, these programs can actually translate that into a PowerPoint presentation. It does it for you. And thereafter, you would just have to go and obviously read through, double check that everything in terms is laid out the way you want it. But it will even put it in the form of a chart or basically shapes. So we always encourage, if it comes to the structure of formulating your presentation, you don't necessarily have to spend, excuse me, hours and hours actually trying to perfect this. There are tools out there. And I think even with Microsoft, we just went to a workshop recently. So if you have Copilot, which is an AI tool, if you have Copilot, there's an add-on into PowerPoint. And what it can do is actually it will use AI to basically create your slides for you as well. So obviously, never rely on it for content. We're just looking what is the best way to make our slides actually visually appealing. Because at the end of the day, we want to improve efficiency as well. So yeah, so I'll just hand over back to you, Nkosi, if there's no questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you for that. Should I now close the poll, Doc, or you still waiting for some answers?
No, I think you can close it, Nkosi. That'll be okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank. Okay, thank you, colleagues. I don't know if anyone has a question before we can officially close this presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Lorenzo. I see we have a hand up from Dr. Ezeji. You can just unmute your mic.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon.
Yes,
we
we
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Yes, good presentation. I want to add that during visual presentation, Dr. David mentioned that sometimes people used to have distraction. Sometimes some people are at the supermarket, at the mall.
Sorry for that, Doc. Let me just unmute. Okay, sorry, Doc. You can
Because
continue.
yeah, yes, because of the people's various engagements. Some people are at work, some are in a noisy place like the mall or workplace where there is noise, and so forth and so on. Yeah. So, but I'm suggesting that maybe during visual presentation, the person presenting or the coordinator can also ask people that join earlier, maybe 10 minutes of the starting of the presentation.
Yeah.
And ask people to open their, what do you call it, their video.
Yes.
There should be a forum whereby people will introduce themselves briefly before the main presentation. In order to catch the attention of people. Maybe even if there are some visual presentation that we have about 150 participants, and if you ask them to put on their video, it might affect the quality of the of the conference or seminar or the presentation. So I think that once someone is presenting, he can, of the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes, ask the people that join earlier to introduce themselves or to on their video so that we can see them. So so that we can capture the attention of people, because it doesn't worth it that somebody will come up with a good presentation and nobody captured what he's talking about. That is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. That's a very good suggestion. I think we'll try it out in future workshops as well. If anyone would be comfortable to open up their video, and I think it would just be a nice sort of meet and greet between the presenter and the actual audience, which yeah would actually improve engagement and level of comfort as well. So thank you for that suggestion. We appreciate it. Are there any more suggestions or questions from any members present? Please feel free. Otherwise, I think Mr. Nkosi will close the session in a minute or two.
Okay, anyone with the questions, colleagues? I see that, okay, Dr. Ezeji that's an old hand, I think. Okay, I don't think we have a new question. If colleagues you do have, before we can officially close the session, this is the time whereby you can just any question regarding this workshop that you have just attended. So if you do have a question, just unmute your mic and ask your question. In the meantime, I have reposted or reshared the link for feedback. We kindly request you to take a few minutes and fill that link, fill that form. It's for reporting purposes as well as to give feedback to our facilitators for taking their time in facilitating this workshop. So I've also shared the link for the RCT MS system, which is now the platform for the RCT units whereby all our workshops are there. We put all our workshops in one place, the recording as well as the previous workshop and upcoming workshops. So, and all our events that we are providing and all other services such as the writing consultation, which is currently undergoing. And then once it's up, and then we will make an announcement that you can now book a writing consultation via that route. In the meantime, we're still using a link which is available on a postgraduate school website for a writing consultation. I've mentioned earlier in the beginning of the workshop that all the April and March certificates have been sent out. So if you received an incorrect certificate or with the missing information, please reach out to us and with your correct details, and then we'll be happy to assist you with issuing a new or updated certificate. So with those upcoming workshops, we will keep on sharing the registration link. But colleagues, we advise you to use the RCT management system, which is very convenient for us and for you as well. You just register for any workshop that is upcoming. And then once you have attended that workshop and you registered via MS system, so you don't need us to send you your certificate. So the system will generate a certificate of attendance for you. So just download that certificate from the system without us sending you email with your certificate. So that is why I'm encouraging all colleagues to take your time and register your profile. So if you have any problems with registering, you can just email me at kosietu.n, and then I'll schedule a meeting, a Teams meeting, where I can assist you with the registration. So I don't know if I'm closing anyone out who still have a question before I can officially close the session. Okay, I don't see any hands or any chats. With that being said, colleagues, I'm now officially closing the session. Thank you for your attendance, and thank you to our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David, for such a very informative session. We do hope and believe that colleagues have learned something that they can share with other colleagues or with their students, those who are supervising. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you once again, colleagues. We look forward to having you in our upcoming events or upcoming workshops. We will be sharing out the flyers with all the registration information. So please register for each and every workshop that we provide so that we capture the correct information on our site in terms of issuing the correct certificates. So once again, colleagues, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Lorenzo David. You can have a great day further. I'm now officially closing the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.